Hi guys, welcome back to Eric's Hobby Workshop. In this episode, I go head to head with Dark Matter Workshop in a terrain deathmatch. Dark Matter Workshop is one of my personal favorite YouTube channels. Gert makes great terrain and educational tutorials that are also super entertaining. So I thought it would be fun if I reached out to her and said, let's do something together. I'm a big fan of your channel. I think it'd be really cool and a great way for us to showcase our skills. And anyways, I'll show you the video I sent him. Kind of speaks for itself. Hey Gert, I'm calling you out, dude. I challenge you to a high stakes, high impact, high octane showdown, a terrain deathmatch. The rules are as follows. You must build one piece of terrain inspired by one of the territories in the Necromunda rulebooks. Any one of them exists. The Book of Judgment, the original rulebook, whatever. And just to make it interesting, let's add some stakes. To the winner goes ultimate glory, and to the loser must watch one whole season of Young Sheldon and make a review of it to prove he watched it. Do you have what it takes? Can you handle this challenge? I'm coming for you, dude. Okay, watching that back, the tone is a little bit more hardcore than I remember, because this was a few weeks ago. Anyways, here's Gert's response.
Ooh, challenge accepted.
I meant a few words. I like it. Let's do this. Okay, so for the basis of this project, I wanted to use this Barbie stage. This is the Rock and Royals set. I guess there's like a rock and roll Barbie and a princess Barbie, and they got sent to the wrong summer camps and two worlds collide. I got this in a thrift shop for a few bucks, and it is kind of dirty. It's got this dusty, sticky residue on it. So let's give this thing a nice wash before we mess around with it any further. Into the sink we go. A little bit of soap, a little bit of water. Not bad. Dry that thing off, and I realized there's all these kind of nooks and crannies on the underside, and I probably need to disassemble it all the way. So I used my trusty screwdriver, pulled off that bottom panel, and look at all these nice gears and bits down there. Beautiful. But there's also this weird white grease, and I guess this keeps it moving smoothly, but I don't want anything to do with this stuff. So I'm going to take all of these pieces out, separate them, and give them a nice wash. And I'm left with this. As you can see, these pieces on the right are really promising, but these pink pieces are obviously no good, like this one here with the stars. This one's cool though, it could be a little servo arm or something. But these are the interesting pieces. Basically I have this T shape and this L shape, but it does have this giant guitar on it, which I'll have to cover up. But let's see what kind of shape I can make out of this that'll be interesting. So I played around with different orientations of these pieces, and nothing really seemed to work very well. I don't know, just things weren't going my way. So I decided, you know what? I'm not going to use this piece. So you're probably wondering why I kept this whole segment in about the Barbie thing when I didn't end up using it. And there's a really simple reason for that. I get more messages than you could imagine where somebody has a piece of, packing styrofoam or something they got at a thrift store, and they say,
Eric, this piece is so cool. I know I can build something really cool out of this. What should I build? I need ideas.
And I get trapped in this same trap. And it's okay to just not use the piece. Like, it's more than okay. Don't force your creativity into a box where you have to use a certain piece if it's not working for you. If it's not working, just put it in the bits box and you'll maybe use those pieces eventually. Don't let the materials dictate how your project goes. That's backwards. So it's back to the bits box and back to the drawing board. Right now I'm just pulling out anything that inspires me a little bit, seeing if I can get some ideas from all my bits. It gets a bit messy, but this is how I do it. And look at this, I found something interesting. This is the top of a Gatorade bottle with a pickle jar lid, and that's kind of a cool industrial looking shape. So I'll use that with this little Christmas tin, and I'm starting to feel the formation of an idea here. This could be a pool of toxic waste. So in preparation for this, I took a gander through some of my Necromunda rulebooks, and my eye caught on the synth still, for two reasons. One, I'm currently working on the Venom Babes, an Escher gang that my wife is going to play. Two, if you're familiar at all with the rules of Necromunda, you know that if you get shot and you're close to an edge, there's a chance that you're going to fall off that edge. And I've always wanted to have a big pool of toxic waste or ooze that you can fall into if you fall off an edge. So this build was kind of designed around maximizing the probability that you can fall into a vat of toxic waste. And that's pretty cool. So I take some cardboard from a cereal box and I make some 1-inch strips and some 1/2-inch strips. These are going to be used to detail my tank once I cut them out with a pair of scissors. You should be left with some nice strips like these. And then using a hot glue gun, I attach these to my tank in sort of a pattern that just gives it a more interesting shape. I put a thick one on the bottom, a thin one on the top, a thin one on top of the thick one. I'm just making it up as I go. I had this cool idea that this label maker might be good for making rivets. I set it to the period, and then I just punch out a bunch of periods. And when that's done, I get this long strip of embossed rivet texture that are some really tiny rivets. I cut that strip thinner so it's a symmetrical sort of strip, peel off the backing, and attach that to the tank. This is kind of a promising idea. I think this has some potential. It's not the most prominent texture I've ever seen, so we'll see how it holds up after paint. Next I cut some pieces out of a 1-inch XPS foam. These pieces are going to be a structure, kind of like a pump house I imagined, made out of concrete in behind my pool. So I use hot glue, glue those together, and I made a more interesting shape than just a box because I thought it would be more interesting. Next I use my glue gun to glue all these construct pieces together. These constructs are a toy from the 80s that you can get a big bag of for pretty cheap on eBay. These might have a fond place in some of your childhoods. Anyways, I'm gluing this on to my piece of chipboard. Another thing I should mention as I cut these little dabs off the constructs piece is that I've restricted myself to an 8.5 by 11 piece of chipboard. And I glue everything down on there, and as you can see, I'm already right to the edges. But this is just so my project doesn't sprawl indefinitely. I glue a piece of chipboard to the top there, and then I use some of those mini Pepsi cans, trace out some circles on a piece of chipboard, cut them out, and glue them to the ends of my miniature Pepsi cans. This is going to create a more of a tank shape and less of a distinct pop can shape. And the same, I glue a chipboard circle to my little boiler thing, and then I glue my Pepsi cans on right above this toxic waste pool. Next I'm going to use a cardboard tube, and cardboard tubes have this distinctive spiral pattern and I don't want that, so I'm going to cover it in white glue and attach a piece of paper. And I do my best to smooth it with my thumbs and cut it into length, but the end result is still a little bit wrinkly, but you know what, it's not as distinctive as that spiral shape, so I'm still happy with that. So I slap that bad boy on with a bit of hot glue. Next I'm going to use some more constructs to build a frame for the upper portion. I'm using a ton of constructs in this build, but it's because I'm really enjoying just building with them in the nice regular shapes you can create really fastly and easily. Fastly? Did I say fast? I meant quickly. So I add my little industrial boiler looking thing in there, and I'm starting to figure out where this is going to go. A piece of chipboard on the top, and then I cut some stairs into the block of foam, adding a little piece of styrene stairs. I'll put a link for these in the description, they're awesome. Next I take some of these pieces of Ruminate toy, which is a big bag I got at the thrift store, but I'll still link the toys in the description below, and I sand them and glue them together to make a nice long platform with a little bit of a diving board thing. You can see me rubbing it against the table to make sure it doesn't stick as it sets. Then I add glue to that, lots of glue, so make sure you're not breathing too much in. And I smooth that down and add a little bit of baking soda which adds a nice gritty texture and helps the glue set, which allows it to grab onto the mesh better. And as you can see, I made a couple other platforms as well. Next, I glue those platforms on with some hot glue. Alright. Make sure you use a miniature to test that everything's looking good. Essential part of the process. Hot glue the upper platform on as well. And then it's time to add a smokestack. And for this I'm using PVC pipe. As you can tell, I'm not using the pieces that slot into each other because in my opinion they're less realistic as a large scale pipe, because the difference in the gauge and the gauge of the joints is not something you see in larger pipes. So I use tricky diameters that match up and a cardboard tubes to hide the gaps, and then I get a nice uniform shaped pipe. Next I use my clippers to clip some of the construct's pegs off and add a panel to the side. I use chipboard I-beams to add some support structures underneath. Little details like this I find go a really long way. And one on the side as well. Next I'm adding some hot glue and I am gluing down my tank. Nice. I use some of these plastic pipes. I've used these in a ton of videos and I'll link them in the description below. They're super cheap, super versatile, and are just absolutely awesome for these industrial builds. I add a piece to support, one on the side, and then I add this piece, which I found inside the pump for an old bottle of hand soap. These pieces are absolutely awesome. I got this idea from a channel called Scratch Bashing. I think this is like a steam vent or something on this pipe. I glue another lid to my boiler / still piece, and then glue that inside my structure. The next pipe I'm adding here is going to be connecting the pipe to the still structure. And I'm no scientist, but I imagine that you could boil something off in the little still thing, have it condense in this pipe, and then have it come down into those tanks. It helps to think about how the actual item functions when you're building it, because it just ties things in with realism a little bit. I add another smokestack to this column. This helps the overall silhouette quite a lot, I think. Next I use some hardware cloth and I just push the tines of it into the foam to make a ladder. Later I'll seal this on with some Mod Podge, but right now I didn't have perfect glue for gluing this in. If you guys have some suggestions for glue for using there, I would like to hear them. The rest of them I'll just glue on with hot glue. This ladder is made from a toy plastic tennis racket, which I've showed in previous videos how to do. I also add a pipe coming from my cans into the tank. Great. Time to add some glue. And once the glue is down on the base, it's time to add some sand. I think crafting as a form of self-expression is a great way to grow as a person. And you'll find that as your project grows, you've grown too, only more beautiful. Once your sand is down, clean up the rest of it and put it back in your sand tin. Or don't, if you prefer more of a beach vibe to your craft space. Next I'm going to brush on some Mod Podge to all the exposed paper products and foam. And before we paint this thing, let's talk a little bit more about the competition rules. So, the way we're going to decide this deathmatch is you guys are going to vote. Make sure you're subscribed to both me and Gert, and then vote down in the comments. If you aren't subscribed to both of us, your vote doesn't count. And you can actually vote twice. You can vote once in the comments below, and you can vote once in the comments over on Dark Matter Workshop's channel. So if you want to vote for me, just say I preferred Eric's Hobby Workshop, and if you want to vote for Gert, just say I preferred Eric's Hobby Workshop, and we'll understand what you meant by that. And when we're tallying the votes, I'm sure there'll be no confusion, it'll be fine. So yeah, just go over to Gert's video and comment I think Eric won, because I really don't want to watch this young Sheldon show. Okay, back to it. First I'm going to hit this with a coat of Krylon black paint. And that's really my favorite part. I've said this before, but it unifies all the colors and I love it. Next I add a few mists from above of an acrylic silver paint. This was actually a bad idea later, because if you mist a paint, sometimes it dries on the way there, and this gave me some sparkly dust all over the piece. I also hit it in a few places with this acrylic brown paint. And that helps to add a bit of a rustiness and some speckled cool texture. I thought this was kind of fun. It's a little bit different from what I normally do, but I like how it turned out. Next I paint the concrete in a light gray color, stippling it to give it a nice pattern without too many obvious brush strokes. And then I dry brush certain pieces a brighter silver to make them stand out more. This is the first coat that I give to the boiler piece, but I also hit some of the walkways and other places where I wanted the detail to pop out. So at some point during this project, I watched the movie Akira for the first time, and it has a really cool cyberpunk vibe with lots of pastel colors and bright lights. So I started to be influenced by this and added this sort of avocado-y green color, which is normally way outside my comfort zone. I tried to give it a bit of a gradient from one side to the other, with it being darker in one corner and lighter in the other, because I think that makes it look a lot more interesting. I painted my still piece, the boiler thing, gold by adding a little bit of gold and dry brushing it on. And then I decided to go for a pop of color on these tanks as well and made them this vibrant lilac sort of color. Again, this was inspired by the cyberpunk vibe in Akira, and it also matches my wife's gang, which also features bright colors in their dyed mohawks and ponytails. I added a gradient to this as well to make them lighter at the bottom. Next I give the gold thing a nice wash of Agrax Earthshade. This really makes it a much more interesting looking gold color. With the dark wash, I add some streaks to my concrete areas, and I also generously apply the wash to a lot of the metal areas and other tanks to add some contrast and grimy detail. I added to the color panels as well, just to ground them a little bit and make them look a little bit less poppy. I used some watered down brown and orange paint to add some rust effects to these tanks. In my opinion, this is not my most successful rust effect, but I didn't want them to look totally beat up and lose all that color. I apply a really watery orange wash on top of the brown rust effects to give the sense of rusty water flowing over these things over the time. Next I use a toothbrush to spray on some brighter orange rust. This part looked pretty good. And then I do something similar where metal meets the concrete. Time for some resin effects. I'm using 2-part casting epoxy made by EasyCast, and this stuff's awesome. But what I have learned from experience is you gotta place these bad boys in a warm bath of water. When you take the bottles out of this, they should be warm to the touch. This is super important to not get a bunch of million bubbles, and I've learned this the hard way. So I measure out 2 equal portions. You should really use plastic cups, but I didn't have any, so I had to use this measuring cup, which is not ideal. You stir that for 2 minutes, transfer it into another container, stir it for an additional minute, and then right at the end I added a little bit of green paint, and this gave it a nice toxic look. I pour that in there. This is making me realize how long it's been since I've had a Mountain Dew. There we go. Nice resin effect. No bubbles at all. Next I'm going to take some tea lights and pop the bottoms off them and pull them out of their carriages to get these bare pieces. I'm going to apply to the LED a little bit of latex masking fluid. And I'm going to take a bunch of bits outside and spray paint them black. I didn't use all of these, but I'm going to use some of them for the detailing phase now. Even those tea lights get a coat of black spray paint. As you can see, I'm mixing in some Games Workshop bits in here as well. Normally I avoid that in my builds, but since it's a competition, I'll throw a couple in there. So I'm dry brushing heavily with some bolt gun metal here. And then for the screen of this little terminal, I'm going to paint it black, and then I'm going to add some green to the bottom left corner and successfully highlight that up, and then add some tiny little white words. This gives the impression of a functional computer screen with a sort of old analog technology, which I really like. And I'll glue that on to my boiler, and that adds some really cool detail. Next I'll peel the latex off of that LED. We've got a nice clean light bulb looking thing underneath. Make sure it still works. It still does, kinda. And then I use some gel super glue to super glue a few of these painted lights onto my structure. And just like that, a really quick and easy light fixture. It involves no wiring, no soldering, and they add a nice easy light source. I continue adding details to the piece, like barrels, this diamond plate flooring, and some railings from the Dark Uprising set, as well as some railings that I made out of hardware cloth. These barrels will pile up in the corner here. These are probably full of some toxin produced by this little factorum. And then I add some wire. This wire is one piece of guitar string and 2 pieces of floral wire. Guitar string has a cool texture, but it has a lot of bounce. The floral wire holds it in place. And I'm going to wire some of these wires from my lights and to various pieces of machinery around the piece to give a more realistic feel and add a little bit more visual interest. Next I'm adding some graffiti. As I mentioned, my wife's gang is called the Venom Babes, so I'm going to write Venom here up on the tank, but I'll add a few little pieces around the project as well. More graffiti can be added over the course of a campaign, and that way each piece of graffiti has a story behind it, whether it's a memorable victory or whatever. And we're done! So there it is, there's my entry. I hope you guys like it. Please vote down below and head on over to Dark Matter Workshop's channel, subscribe and vote there as well. And we will see, I guess, which one of us has to watch Young Sheldon. And I so don't want to watch it, guys. Please, please, please vote for me. Yeah, that's about it. As usual, if you want to support the channel, I've got associate links down below for Amazon if you want to use some of the materials I used in this video. And also, I've got a link to my Patreon, where we've got a Discord server and are building a nice little terrain community over there where we can share our work in progress shots, etc. And it's really cool, so I hope to see you guys over there. And that's about it from me today, guys. We'll see you next time on Eric's Hobby Workshop.